Okay, thank you, Linda. We have a panel today that's been assembled. It's going to paint a broad brush of nature-based recreation, and I'm going to let them have about 5 to 8 minutes. I'll try to moderate, keep us on time, and then we'll save some time at the end for some questions. One of the unique things about what we're doing is we heard last night from our speaker. If you stayed and watched the movie last night, it was a good snapshot of the real challenge when you try something this radical, this new, this different in a community-based setting. And so I like the concepts of thinking big but starting small so that you don't get overwhelmed, and looking at some of the impacts that actually setting up those spaces have on the population that we're working with. We know from the research that it helps our people, both living in our communities and visiting our communities, develop a sense of place as to where they are, the values of where they live or where they're visiting. It helps our young people in brain development. The research shows that it helps young people with brain development. It helps young people develop a sense of empathy for living things. And if done over time and in a more formal manner, formal, non-formal combination, it also helps our young people gain academic skills in science and STEM learning concepts. So that's some of the research and some of the value of why we want to do this kind of work. But I'm going to let our panel talk a little bit, kind of a broad-brushed approach to what they see from their view. And we're going to be talking about landscapes and biomes with John Logering from UMC, water management and water-based recreation, Hank Ludke, who is mayor of Frazee and also a member of our Red River Basin Commission Board of Directors. Resources from the tourism perspective, Dave is here from Dave Bergman from Minnesota Tourism Department. And then we'll also talk about human public health benefits from our county health folks here in Polk County. So I'm going to turn it over to John first to start us off.
Thank you very much, Joe. Let's see. Good, technology works. I guess as a matter of a quick disclaimer, not really disclaimer, I'm one of the interesting university employees that has a joint appointment. So I'm here at University of Minnesota Crookston, where I have predominantly a teaching appointment. This is part of my extension responsibilities, so thanks to the extension folks. My challenge or charge today was to present the state's resources from a natural resource perspective at the 30,000 foot level at 700 miles an hour. So Joe said you'll never get done in, well, okay, I'll paraphrase. He said you'll never get done in 5 to 8 minutes, but I talk fast. Minnesota has a unique resource base. It's one of the more unique states in the country. In fact, we have 4 major continental level biomes, and you can see them here: coniferous forest, aspen parkland, prairie parkland or prairie grasslands, and deciduous forest. 3 or 4 unique biomes. No other state, non-mountainous state in the country has 4 biomes. And here in Crookston, I always like to highlight, within 100 miles you can get to all 4. We're sitting here in the prairies, and it would take, just a quick jaunt toward Bemidji, and we're into that coniferous forest or the boreal forest. So it's a really unique area biologically. And it's generally underutilized. We have lots of resources, lots of space, and lots of opportunity. We have wide ranges of coverages and various agencies that protect, preserve, conserve these resources. We have many state forests, state parks, state recreation areas. The WPA there is a waterfowl production area. Those are federally managed, predominantly for waterfowl, but are open to the public. Scientific and natural areas, wildlife management areas, 5, oops, this is an old slide, my apologies to anyone who's here from Glacial Ridge National Wildlife Refuge. We have now 5 national wildlife refuges in the northwest part of the state, and I'm highlighting the northwest because, well, that's where you are. Lots of trails, and if I had known the Center for Changing Landscapes was going to be downstairs with their trail brochure, I would have tried to steal their slide, which is better than my slide. But lots of trails, lots of reasons for people to come to the northwest part of the state. anything from this Pine to Prairie Birding Trail, which has been highly successful. At least I think it's been successful. I hope they believe it has been successful. We did a survey early on in its generation, and found out that we surveyed folks who'd come, and indeed, for the modest investment of creating the trail, they received an economic impact to the region that was pretty reasonable. And there are all sorts of other things. An international trail here, the Prairie Passage Trail, celebrating the tallgrass communities. Prairie is one of those things that we don't have a lot of in the state. There are very few is left from prehistoric times, and yet people love to flock to these wide open spaces and get this sort of pioneer experience where you can stand and really see the landscape fall about you. And if you haven't had that opportunity, there are several spots just to the east of town where you can really get a feel and a sense for what our early forefathers who settled this landscape would have felt as they opened up from the treed areas to the east and just found this vast grassland. Wildflower routes also pretty popular, especially this time of year. If you're into wildflowers, get out there now, because this is really, from now until the end of the summer, is a beautiful time to be out there. We also have resources as we move to the east. Things like the Big Bog or Red Lake Bog State Recreation Area. Gorgeous site, one of Minnesota's last wilderness areas. We do have the Boundary Waters Canoe Area wilderness, but this is an area that is remote, it's quiet, it's somewhat peaceful, if you will, and it's isolated. It gives you the sense that is none like any other place. You can get to some of it during the summertime, but really the wintertime is the best place to visit because it's an inherently wet environment. So if you want to stay above the water, waiting till it's frozen is a pretty good idea. You can see moose and great gray owls and many other species that are not that abundant in Minnesota, that are what I'd like to think of as charismatic megafauna that draw people to the region. You can go to one site and see both moose and great gray owls, again in the winter. Great opportunity, great draw for folks. We do see moose occasionally in Crookston, but it's usually because they're sick. So what do we do out there? Anyone who lives in this region realizes with 10 months of winter, we need to find things to do. So various winter activities, many summer activities as well, canoeing, tubing, water sports. Hank's going to talk a little bit about water recreation coming up, so I won't steal his thunder. Fishing, we love to do it, and Minnesotans do it well. Angling is a major pastime. Hunting, wildlife resources. You know, angling and hunting are very visible recreational pursuits. You can usually identify an angler. You know, they've got a boat behind their SUV, or they've got a rod in their hand. Hunters all dress in those funny clothing, usually of bright colors. But it's the wildlife watchers I want you to start thinking a little bit more about, because they're not readily identifiable. They're sort of, I consider them the ninja tourists, because they slip in and slip out without being noticed. And yet they are the ones that are the largest segment of our population and the most rapidly growing. And I'll hopefully show you that here in just a bit. Every 5 years, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does a survey looking at hunting, fishing, and recreation, wildlife-related recreation in the country. So these are national level statistics. And you can see Minnesota participates in angling. We're number 2 in the nation behind Alaska, which would make sense. If you've ever been to Alaska, fish is something they do well up there. Hunting and wildlife watching, all are something that our population really engages and participates in. There are 78.1 million wildlife watchers in the country, and they spend $54.9 billion. You know, that was in 2011. That would have put them on the Fortune 500 company list above something. You may have heard of this company, small little company called Motorola. So it's a big industry that we can tap into, I think. And you can see also there's the statistics there for hunters and anglers. One thing that I won't show the slide I thought I had in there. One thing that is important or notable is that hunting, if you look at the last 15 years, angling and hunting are reasonably stable to slightly increasing, and wildlife watching has the most dramatic increase, both in terms of number of participants as well as the dollars spent. So to capitalize on that, I think it provides a lot of opportunity. All right, so my summary here is that we have unique landscapes biologically that we can use to attract, well, both our residents as well as tourists to the area. We have many ownerships dedicated to conservation, and we have several opportunities that exist and are both recreationally as well as economically viable. A real big opportunity. I was also asked to provide some challenges. So here's my list of quick challenges. We're a long way from a population center to make things more economically viable from issues of scale, which I think is both an asset as well as a challenge. We need to encourage folks to visit, and once we have them here, show them really what it's all about and get them to return to the area. We have wide open spaces which offer peace and tranquility, but it also offers something that a lot of urbanites are not usually prepared for, like terrible cell phone coverage. You know, we all carry these things in our pockets and we think everywhere has 4G coverage. I got news for you. In the middle of the Big Bog State Recreation Area, you ain't got 4G coverage. There's no way it's going to happen. We also have something called first-time user anxiety, or that I like to label first-time user anxiety. And a great example was a conversation I had many years ago with someone who was coming up to do the prairie chicken blinds. Now, as a quick bit of background, prairie chickens are these prairie grouse of the prairies. They have this very elaborate reproductive display in the spring of the year where the males all get together and you know, puff out their air sacs and dance around and make all sorts of noises. And it's sort of an orgy on the Greek or Roman sort of scale. And as voyeurs, it's really fascinating to watch. But you have to get there an hour before sunrise, which means you have to be in your car at 3:30, driving to this place in the dark, and sometimes it's foggy. And if you're a first-time user, this all sounds a little too intimidating because let's face it, you know, the directions are often, well, yeah, you go down and then you turn right at that area. There used to be an old landscaping area there, but that's down, and I think the sign's still there, but it probably doesn't say anything because it's worn off. And you turn right there, and you go down the road about 2.5, 3 or 4 miles, and then you look for a field approach. And I've had people from the city say, well, what's a field approach? Right? Those of us in the ag lands know, of course, what a field approach is, but you know, it's that first-time user anxiety that is a little bit disconcerting. And so making sure we have mileposts for first-time users, and we don't use the sort of directions we might give to our friends who've lived here for 25 years. And then, of course, service hours that are less than most urbanites expect. You know, again, driven home to me by when I hired a fellow, and we're driving home from the Twin Cities, and it's 9 o'clock in the evening, and he thinks, well, should we stop in Fergus Falls and get gas? Yeah, we should, because at 10:30 when we go through Ada, it's not open. So we will have to remember to sort of coach folks a little bit on the sort of opportunities that are here, as well as the resources that are here. So that's our challenge, is to get them to come the first time and convince them they should come back over and over and over again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. Very thought-provoking. One thing I'll challenge the group to think about is eliminate the word cell phone and add in mobile device. Okay, that's a 20th century technology. There are opportunities for mobile devices even without the tower. So as you're thinking in design thinking, think beyond kind of those boxes. Great job. Now I'm going to call on Hank Ludke to come on up and talk about water-based recreation.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you all for coming today. I will be talking about somewhat of water-based recreation, but I'll also be talking about recreation in general in this area and the rest of the state. But when we look at John's presentation of 30,000 feet and 700 miles an hour, mine will be going to use Mr. Peabody's time machine, the Wayback Machine. Let's see if I can get this to work. You know, we look at nature-based recreation in Minnesota. The first slide you see on the left is the Ottersdale State Water Trail, and that was our ice run this spring that we have there, the last weekend in May. We didn't do it last year because there was ice on the river. And you see how we fish in Minnesota with the center photo. And of course, you can see how I try to ride a bicycle. I make sure that I'm highly visible in case I fall over. I don't like to get ran over by anything. When we look at how we used to hunt and how we hunt now, things have changed quite a bit over the years. You know, it at times was hard to tell who was doing what. It was quite an issue for the hunter-gatherers, our predecessors, to compare to what we do nowadays. You know, and we look at these activities, it's not the same. It was a matter of survival. You didn't go down to the grocery store and hunt and gather. And, you know, other types of hunting weren't quite the same either. You know, some of the times we weren't the hunters. You've got to watch out for the big bird in the sky. Fishing has changed a lot. It was a matter of livelihood. Now we have the catch and release programs that happen. And we have people that have, we call these ice castles. A friend of mine spent more on his than I did on my house. Not only does it have the kitchen sink and the flat screen TV, but it has a fireplace in it. Sailing has changed a lot. When the Vikings came here through Hudson Bay, it was a lot different than the gentleman on his windsail, you know, windsurfing. It's things that we used to consider a way of life just to exist are now sport and health related and get you out of nature. And as we've seen, you know, we are more prepared to deal with nature than our predecessors. Bird watching has advanced. We aren't in the cave anymore worried about what's going on. We have tour buses that take us on the birding trail. We have binoculars and cameras where we can see major distances instead of sitting there squinting behind a bush someplace. And of course, canoeing has changed a lot, from our Native Americans doing their ricing to us getting out there and enjoying the beautiful waters of northern Minnesota. And right here, of course, we have the Red Lake River here in Crookston. Yesterday, some of the people that were here went over to the Sandhill River and did some paddling over there. I don't know how many mosquitoes they found or deer flies, but I'm sure they had a good time. And bicycling has advanced quite a bit. It's came from the object on the left, which I have no idea how they got on to even be able to pedal it, to the fat tire machines we have nowadays. Hiking has come of age. It's not something that you have to do, it's something you want to do. Luke Jordan, a personal friend of mine who goes by the moniker of Strider, last year walked the North Country Scenic Walking Trail from Lake Sakakawea in North Dakota to Lake Champlain in New York, 4,600 miles, and now works for the North Country and the National Park Service, helping form our latest chapter of the North Country Trail Association, which will be working in Otter Tail and Wilkin County and going into North Dakota. So they'll be working from Frazee, where I'm mayor, to Fort Abercrombie and the Cheyenne grasslands on this walking path. And this is going to be the premier walking path of the country. It's a sister trail to the Appalachian Trail. And all the work is being done by volunteers or our AmeriCorps friends who we get grant money from the legacy funding that you and I voted in to tax ourselves for because bonding just hasn't seemed to quite make it. And as you can see, you know, our venues have changed. More opportunities and challenges come with this also. And happily, we don't have these things around. But we do have floods, which affect all of us, especially here in the valley. We realize that floods constantly destroy accesses, signage, create problems, cleanups, all of the things which you need volunteers and people to go back out and work on periodically, depending on how the weather is. We have erosion issues, which becomes a major thing. Every spring, we have to get somebody on the river to see where a tree has fallen down, what else has happened. Then we have to get somebody out there with a chainsaw to cut the tree out. They have to have their permits, you know, to be able to run a saw so they don't cut their leg off or something. My favorite story on dealing with cleaning out snags and things along this line were at Frazee with 2 members of a CC crew. I had 4 camping in my yard one summer that we sponsored to work on the state water trail, putting in portages. But our system there at Frazee is connected by an old DNR dam to 11 lakes. And during the CCC days, they changed the way some of these lakes drained and they put in tiled canals for a flood control system on the Otter Tail before the big dam was built west of Fergus Falls. And so I had two guys, 2 girls. Well, the guys decided that they were going to paint stuff for the accesses and clean out some of that. And the ladies took the chainsaws and hopped in the canals and started cutting beaver dams out. And it was interesting to watch these 2 gals get in there and just go at it. And they worked so hard. I was so proud of them. And the guys, you know, I was about ready to kick them all the rest of the day for letting the girls have to do all this work by themselves. The other thing is access. We always hear this, you know, God, it's a great idea. You know, I really think we should have this, but not in my backyard. Can't we do it someplace else? Yes, I want it close, but I don't want to use any of my land or anything for this. Signage. You look at something like this, you know, how do you figure it out? You either have signage or you don't have signage. And as John said, you know, the sign might be there, but you can't read it. Or, you know, you give the type of directions just like he's talking about. You know, you go to Art Johnson's store, you make a right. Well, Art Johnson's store isn't there anymore. It burned down 25 years ago. But everybody in the neighborhood knows where it was. But to get somebody else to realize where this is not easy. And then, of course, we have our opportunities. We have our state water trails, which we keep working on. And we have an amazing number of people that come and use these things. We have some Facebook things. We work constantly with the DNR and private parties to help update these things so that you can know if there's a hazard or something going on these water trails. And we continue to work on a number of trails. We have the Agassiz Recreational Trail that runs here to Crookston. We have the Heartland Trail, which we're working on the extension from Park Rapids to Moorhead. And of course, the 4,600-mile National Trail. And there's many opportunities for when you get my age to get involved to help work on these things if you don't have anything else to do, because we will find you something. And the new types of recreation, the fat tire bikes running in the winter. I remember when I was at the University of Minnesota and lived off campus and couldn't afford a vehicle, I had a Gaton bicycle that I rode back and forth to campus all year, unless I could catch a ride. And of course, the paddle boarders. This is something new. We have a lady at home that does yoga classes on paddle boards. And she has 2 dogs that go with her every place around the lake and either swim or are with her on the boards. Technology has came to water-based and trail recreation, and to families traveling who plan trips now around geocaching. The kids look this stuff up on the website, and they plan out the routes on what their parents are going to do to see if they can find these things and add a little something to a geocache. So the next thing that we run into with our opportunities are funding. We have all these different organizations that can help us, and we keep having discussion and seminars on how to navigate through this. And with the help of many people and all of you contributing to this, we are building a better trail system, better water-based recreation, better nature-based recreation in this state. But we have AIS issues too. And, you know, what are the futures of recreation? How do we adapt? How do we get more public buy-in? How do we plead our case to the government, to the public? What do we do with the carp? Well, I'll show you what the people at the Peoria Carp Hunters do. This is a thing that they think should be the next Olympic sport. This is called scarping. And the carp, when a boat comes by, they jump out of the water because of the noise. These guys put on helmets, get on water skis, use landing nets to catch them, and then they have like a basketball hoop with a bucket underneath it, and the idea is to get the fish out of the landing net and get it into the bucket. So, is this the future of water recreation? Any questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Wow, these guys are doing pretty good. We're kind of right on time, so thank you, Hank. One of the things that Hank brought up in the slides was once we build it, how do we manage it and maintain it? I think that's a challenge we have with any nature-based activities we do. So the other piece, I think, is really thinking outside the box, because if you've watched the media lately, there's a lot of activity going on with the younger generations, especially in some of this kind of extreme stuff where someone starts this thing and it gets out on the social media or on the Facebook or the web, and then they challenge others to do it. So I can see the scarping that he talked about might be one of those that may fit in the future here if we have the issues we may have. Next, I'd like to call on Dave Bergman from the Tourism Department.
Good morning. Noted author Joseph Campbell put out a quote saying, "Your sacred space is where you can find yourself again and again." We'll get there. I think that's the basis of tourism, both in Minnesota and in Northwest Minnesota. I myself have 3 sacred places. One is the point up at War Road. I can sit on the shoreline and look out at Lake of the Woods, and I see the distance, and I know there's possibility. My second place is Thief Lake. Spent a very important day with my father about a year before he passed away. Shot my first goose, had a great experience. Sitting in a goose blind at Thief Lake is special. And the third one is the number 4 tee box at Fertile Golf Course, the Sand Hills Golf Course. you can hit about a 200-yard drive, and as it floats through the air off of this cliff that you're on, you have dreams of being in the PGA someday. Even though you know you'll never do that. Just wanted to touch base with those that talked about how flat we are and maybe how cold we are. After you finish the conference today, drive to Fertile, about 22 miles away, start at the covered bridge, and I want you to walk up to the tee box, which is about 100 yards above on the ridge there. Tell me how flat and how cold we are by the time you get there, please. Wanted to talk a little bit about nature-based tourism and recreation in Northwest Minnesota, and to do so, you have to go back and look at the past. But before that, I wanted to talk about the impact of tourism in Minnesota. I've brought some of our great cereal boxes. These detail and tout the value of tourism in Minnesota. I'll just show you some brief numbers. Tourism in Minnesota is a $12.5 billion industry. And I don't know how well you can see those numbers there. I will leave copies of these out if you'd like to take those with you. But even in some of our smallest counties, tourism impact can be a $2 or $3 million industry. How does that stack up to companies in some of these smaller counties in Northwest Minnesota? It's a significant player and one that can be grown and developed. The next slide, also a little bit hard to see, is participation rates by region. One of the things that we have in Northwest Minnesota is the people that come to our areas spend a lot more time outside and doing outdoor activities, birding, hunting, fishing, all of those. As I said, to see the present and the future, look to the past. And this is a little bit about some of the nature-based recreation we had in Minnesota at one time. We've talked about hunting, and the previous speakers are 100% right. It used to be subsistence. Now it's become more of a recreational activity. With all deference to any Canadians in the audience, we're the birthplace of snowmobiling. And fishing. And you can see we've changed a lot. When I first started with tourism, we used to see these photos with all these fish. And now they've gone to the quality versus quantity approach. Wanted to talk about what it is currently. Just a couple quick things. I-500 snowmobile race was a big thing, started back in the 70s, where they raced from Winnipeg down to the Twin Cities. We're very thankful and appreciative of the fact that it's coming back next year. They're going to run from Winnipeg to Willmar. And it gives a chance for people to show that we have a great trail system and an opportunity to snowmobile in Northwest Minnesota. A little bit about ATVing. There are a couple initiatives right now within the communities to create ATV scramble parks. There's other parts of the state, the Iron Range and Appleton, Minnesota, that have great success with this approach. We have great trails, but we don't have that congregating place for them. Goose Fest, little town of Middle River, located about 20 miles north of my home in Thief River Falls, has an annual festival where the town goes from 300 to 3,000. Started in 1975, it was based on bringing hunters there, but they've evolved. So now not only do you have people walking around in camo, but they do an award-winning play 4 nights in a row in the depot with legacy monies. They have parades, they have wood carving exhibits, all sorts of things that they've added to the outdoor recreation component. We mentioned, or it's been mentioned, the Pine to Prairie Birding Trail and the Aspen Parkland Trail Birding Initiative with some of the watershed districts. That's something that's being developed as we go. Fishing on Lake of the Woods. Lake of the Woods is one of the few communities where winter, be it 10 months long, still generates much more visitation. Ice fishing is huge, and it's a fantastic product there. But I also think of Thief River Falls. We sit at the confluence of the Red Lake River and the Thief River, and I would venture to guess that there are now between 75 to 100 ice fishing structures that congregate there in the winter because you can catch fish there. And finally, kayaking and the water trails that we have. One of the things that I want to make mention of is that on September 29th and 30th, there'll be a water trail summit in St. Cloud, Minnesota. It's a cooperative effort between our offices and DNR, and it's a push to make communities take a look at their water resources. We don't have the lakes that a lot of places in Minnesota have, but we do have significant rivers. A couple of issues in promotion. Funding. We have a lot of small towns and resources are limited. One thing please keep in mind as you're having your discussions today is that we live in a competitive world, that great product needs great marketing, and people vote with their feet. You can have the greatest product ever, but you have to have marketing that will accompany to get people to come. It's a competitive world. We've got Disney and Carnival Cruise and all of those trying to get those visitors to come to their locations. We need to cooperate to see them come to this part of the state. Making the pie bigger. If after today the amount of visitors that are coming to Northwest Minnesota doesn't change, that's not a positive. We need to grow the pie, make more of it instead of dividing it into smaller pieces. And one of the biggest challenges, I've seen a lot of discussion as of late talking about adding different wildlife initiatives, and it's whether we combine these initiatives, we cooperate within these initiatives, or we coexist. And so there's going to be a need to have planning and talking about what directions we want to take in that regard. And then issues in participation. Need to generate greater community and deeper involvement. It's got to have a solid base. I read a factoid the other day that said 50% of marriages in the U.S. end in 7 years or less. We need to have initiatives that have length and depth so that they stay around and finalize. One of those that I mentioned is the Red Lake River effort that was started a couple years ago. Fantastic start. And then I think what happened was the money resources, both federally and on a state basis, were a little bit tight. And so my take is it sort of moved away. Hopefully it's just on hiatus and will be coming back. And then investment in infrastructure. I've lived here for 25 years, and we are lucky enough to have two herds of elk in Minnesota, which is really supposed to be something to see. Unfortunately, in all my years up here and all my miles, I've not seen one as I've traveled. And so we need to take a look and see what we can do to make sure people have at least the chance. And I started out by talking a little bit about fertile and the height, but I mean, things like the observation mounds can be of great help because in Northwest Minnesota, if you do get to a certain level, you can see a lot. I want to finish by saying, again, going to Joseph Campbell's quotes, he says, the goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with nature. To do that, find your sacred place again and again. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Dave, and hopefully there's going to be a lot of energy after these morning discussions that we have, but one of the other unique things about Northwest Minnesota, Dave mentioned the birthplace of snowmobiling, it was also the birthplace of our snowmobile trail system in the state of Minnesota, a project coordinated, created, and identified by the University of Minnesota extension system by a county agent back in the 70s. So think about the power the university, our land-grant university, and our extension system has to do some things that will stand the test of time and be lasting things across our state. Next, I'm going to call on Kristen Fagerlund from the Polk County Department of Health. Kristen?
I'm going to be unique right away. I move around too much for a stationary mic, so we're just going to do it this way. So, my name is Kirsten Fagerlund, and I work for Polk County Public Health. My academic education is in nursing. I have a Bachelor of Science in Nursing. My professional education is from the partnerships and the collaborations from Extension, community partners, lots of different academic partners. And so I think we really need to be cognizant of those partnerships and embrace that and think big picture. I've worked in public health for a long time, and it's a little different than your acute care. We're thinking about population health and what's going to make our populations and our communities healthier for all people. We're lucky in the state of Minnesota. Our statistics say that we're a healthy state. Northwest Minnesota, our statistics say that we are a healthy region. And yet, there are disparities within our population, and our goal in public health is to equalize those disparities and make a healthy community for all people. And that's a challenge, I think, that we as human beings and community citizens, no matter what role you have, no matter what job or academic area you come from, need to think about. If we don't have our health, what else matters? So, we need to think about moving upstream in our prevention efforts. We've spent a lot of healthcare dollars and a lot of community dollars on acute care. And we're lucky in the state of Minnesota that they have actually started thinking about chronic disease and how that affects our health. And one of the ways that the state of Minnesota is leading the nation is through the Statewide Health Improvement Program initiative. It's still called a grant, and yet the legislature actually incorporated it into the general fund last legislative session, and so that's a very positive thing. We should be thinking about long-term solutions for health for a while. And the SHIP model talks about improving health by increasing opportunities for healthy choices. Increased opportunities for physical activity, nutritious food, tobacco-free living will mean more people get physical activity, better nutrition, and less tobacco use, which will lead to improved health, lowering healthcare costs, and improving quality of life. Like I said earlier, health equity means every person has the opportunity to realize their health potential, the highest level of health potential for all people, without limits imposed by structural inequities. And this is the goal we need to think about, putting everybody at the same starting line. If you are an Olympic skier, your chances of having increased orthopedic issues increase. That's a fact, but it's fair. But there's a lot of things in life, socioeconomic factors, geographical locations, which aren't necessarily putting people at an equal starting line. So one of the things I wanted you to think about, and when I heard the title of the movie last night, I was a little leery about my slides, but anyway. So we've always kind of said, and there's been great movies out there, that if you build it, they will come, right? Or if you educate them, they will learn, right? No. What I'm here to tell you is that we need to think about this in a little bit different way. We need to provide education on nature, but I want you to challenge you to think about that a little bit deeper. And one of the ways that we at Public Health and through our community partners and lots of the collaborations that we've been working on, we've been exploring this idea that we've been talking about through many of the speakers on community engagement or the community participatory design. This is our famous straw bale maze at Castle Park, which was not a maze by the time we were done, or they were done. But the participatory design allows multiple voices to be heard and involved in the design, resulting in outcomes which suit a wider range of users. And I think that's the key, wider range of users. Thinking about, we might think that the reason that we built a natural play space was to engage children in nature. The outcome actually was our community became more engaged in nature. We had people from all aspects of life and all ages and generations that were interested. As planning affects everyone, those whose livelihoods, environments, and lives that are at stake should be involved in the decisions. Dave talked about community involvement in the way we think about recreation and tourism. When you see this, I think a lot of us think what? You think about that project that you have, and maybe you feel like you're the one pulling the cart and that nobody's following. Maybe you feel like you're the spokes, trying to get a job done and going in every which direction. But I think we, as leaders in our community and leaders in design, need to think of ourselves as the hub. You don't have to pull the cart. You don't even have to build the cart yourself. Maybe you just have to be that first hub in the wheel. So I encourage you to think about being the hub and using your community as part of the process to get you there. The other thing that seems to me to be key with somebody who's not academic in this study but has done a lot of groundwork in it is to really focus on that word with. We can talk about engaging the community, but if you're going to engage the community, you have to be ready for what the community wants to share with you, and you have to be ready to incorporate those ideas and to make sure that you continue to involve them in the process along the way. And that was alluded to also as part of architectural design and continuing on past the actual design when the design is delivered. Remember that engaging people is not just with the mind. We spent a lot of time in this time period talking about education. And we do know now that even though people are educated, they still don't make choices if the choices aren't there. They don't make the right decision necessarily unless the choices are there. But a lot of times if you engage the heart, talk about what's meaningful to them, why they want to be involved, you're going to get more sustainability and more long-term effects. And I just want to go back to that kind of concept about, if we don't have our health, what else do we have? And so there's this idea that we really all need to really embrace in that health and all policy aspect. No matter what decision you're making, whether it's fiscal, academic, a decision within your own family, health is going to be affected. And so I encourage you in your daily life, in your personal life, and in your professional life to think about the decisions that you're making and how those decisions are going to affect health. Health and All Policies emphasizes the need to collaborate across sectors. I think all of us in many ways, shapes, or forms have worked on a grant that says collaboration must be one of the keys to getting this grant. Well, that's all well said, but to make that a true reality takes work. And so make sure that when you commit to your collaborations, commit to collaborating, that you're committed to your collaborators. And that's how you get things moving. And so, he might ask, can we be done? And yes, we can.
Okay, we'll have a little bit of time for a few questions. So if you have questions of the panel, but a couple words from Kirsten's presentation. Partnerships and collaboration, important. Upstream and downstream, both connections and opportunities. And then I think the community engagement piece are really key words that come out of that. Yeah, question back here. Is there microphones?
Hi, I'm Cindy Homer. I work for the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency in St. Paul, and I'm a program development specialist there in watershed restoration and protection. And my particular area right now is rethinking civic engagement. And I'm actually trained as a geologist with service design and design thinking training as well, and so I'm a bit of a misfit amongst my program development cohort there. So this conference really is affirming for me. And I will not be in the nature-based group today, and so I have an ask, if I can be so bold. The traditional way we go about getting community-based and long-term, well, community community participation is steering people towards BMPs or cost incentive programs, that sort of thing. And typically that's very transactional and it only produces short-term involvement. And it's becoming a huge systemic problem. And the design research that I've been doing with a colleague of mine, we're having a really hard time penetrating the institution with this, is that to get the long-term involvement really is about inspiring civic impulse. That we all have it, but our programming and our systems don't allow us to really live it. We come the first 1 or 2 times and interest dies off after that. Or like you guys, I mean, you pointed to all of this. So this is my ask. In terms of where you see the benefits, I know it's research funding and a lot of funding goes to health benefits and economic benefits. What I'd really love for you guys to look at is civic base, because that's one of the key things we're seeing needs to be, aside from restructuring our resources and a couple of other things, civic base. And so, Kirsten, when you guys are talking about the play space here in Crookston, there were a lot of things that came up during the tour yesterday that folks didn't really see, and that is people are showing up and doing things at that place that were never intended, but it's keeping people coming back over and over again. So it's not, I'm really interested in documenting that for places like that, but if you could look at that during your design session this afternoon, I'd really appreciate it. And I'd be happy to talk with anybody. I'm dying to talk with people about this. Thank you.
Back in the back. Thank you. There's an in with one of our state agencies, pollution control agencies, so grab her business cards before she gets out the door today.
Hi, I'm Sherry Boyce. I'm an extension educator in the Center for Youth Development, and my role is in program evaluation, and I also will be in the Extension Reconsidered group this afternoon as part of that state team. My question for this group and also for the session this afternoon is, I come from Duluth, and we are America's outside city, and we have a continual tension between nature-based tourism and nature activities and education for the people who live there. And so as we look at some of the broad implications of what nature-based education and recreation can do for the people who live there, I guess I would hope that both prongs get addressed, because I know in Duluth it's really seductive to go down that tourism path. And especially for our youth, I'm very interested in the education and recreation and health and long-term living issues.
Excellent comments, Sherry. Thank you. Other questions, comments, observations? Okay. Sounds like it's time for a break, so